welcome to Ag PhD. I'm Darren Hefty.
And I'm Brian Hefty. Thanks a lot for joining us today. Normally here on Ag PhD, we talk about herbicides, but we're typically speaking about corn, soybeans, and wheat. Well, today we decided we're going to talk about a few other crops as well, including canola, dry beans, field peas, and lentils.
Well, one of the products that we're going to talk about today, maybe not necessarily in all of those crops, but in soybeans for sure, is metribuzin. But getting that rate just right for your weeds and for your soils is a little tricky, so we're going to talk about metribuzin rates today.
Later in our show today, we've got a Weed of the Week. We also have Iron Talk, but first, here's this week's Farm Basics.
These days, it can be hard to make the math work in your soybean fields. With the Liberty Link system with Liberty Herbicide, it gets easier. A 2+ bushel per acre advantage over Asgrow Roundup Ready to Extend soybeans means at least $18 more an acre for you. Plus, lower system input costs and more complete weed control all adds up to at least $33 more an acre for your farm. That's smart math. Grow smart with BASF.
During our Farm Basics time today, we're going to talk about herbicide breakdown in soil.
One thing that I think is cool is that the hot topic now in agriculture is soil health. And we think about, well, we want to have healthy soil, we'll have healthy plants. The other thing about healthy soil is it's functioning properly. And one of the functions of the soil is to break down things like herbicides.
Okay, so when we have herbicides, we're trying to kill weeds. As farmers, we love what we call residual herbicides that can kill weeds for a long period of time, and they kill them right in the soil, so we don't have to go spray post-emerge several times during the season. The problem with residual herbicides is if you use them at too high a rate, or if they're just exceptionally persistent in the soil, then you can end up hurting next year's crop. That's something we absolutely don't want to do. So we're always looking at how quickly can these products break down in soil. The first thing we look at is the half-life. That tells you how long in normal conditions that product should last in the soil, how many days until half of it is gone.
Now, if there is an extreme drought, if we don't get moisture, that's one of the factors that could lead to that herbicide sticking around a little longer. So we know that for herbicides to break down, we do need a little bit of moisture out there. Now, if you get excessive moisture, it can be a bad thing too. If you have rain every day, well, you can't get the biology in the soil to function either.
Exactly. That's really what it comes back to. Bacteria are able to break down herbicides in soil, in addition to, obviously, if we've got lots of weeds or plants sucking that up, that's really the first thing we want. So if you're in a very weedy field or you have lots of crop growing there all the time, that's going to pull the herbicide in. There's not going to be a lot left in the soil. But if there is product left in the soil, if you have good conditions for bacteria to thrive, then you're going to have faster breakdown of the herbicide. So what are the good conditions for bacteria to thrive?
Well, one of those things is a neutral soil pH or even a slightly acidic soil pH. Where we see some problems is when we get a pH that's really out of whack, where we're very acidic, or on the other end of things, we're a really high soil pH.
So for example, like 4.5 or 5 pH on the low side, 8.5 or 9 on the high side.
The other condition that can cause some problems for herbicide breakdown is really salty soil. If we've got saline soils where we have high soluble salts, or if we have sodic soils where we have high levels of sodium, we can really inhibit the bacterial survival out in the soils and we don't get good breakdown.
The other big thing is these bacteria function when they have heat. So in very cold climates, you're not going to find the bacteria functioning many months out of the year. We live in South Dakota, I can attest to this. But if you have warmer conditions than normal, you're going to have faster herbicide breakdown than normal.
Well, all of these factors will influence where, geographically speaking, farmers will use certain herbicides, what rates they will use, and the timing, and so forth, because farmers understand what it takes to get these herbicides to break down effectively.
Another thing farmers understand is what it takes to control weeds, like our Weed of the Week. Can you identify this week's weed?
Ideal for herbicide applications, the ultra-low drifts large air-inducted droplets were designed to eliminate driftable fines without sacrificing coverage. Its thick three-dimensional pattern creates multiple angles for the spray to cover the target. Hypro, helping you spray better.
Invisible, invasive, underestimated. Nematodes are stealing over 10% of yields, and current protection methods aren't enough. But a breakthrough seed treatment technology controls nematodes when they attack. Now offering NEMA Strike technology. It provides broad spectrum control from the start and stays in the root zone as plants grow. Take back your bushels with NEMA Strike technology. Strike where nematodes attack.
Do you feel like there's never enough time to get everything done before planting? The window for spring work is quick and unforgiving. Give yourself the upper hand with the ProTill High Performance High Speed Disc. More and more farmers agree the ProTill is the right tool for spring field conditions and heavy residue management. Zero maintenance bearings, independent disc technology, oversized pins and bushings allow the ProTill to handle whatever field or conditions you can throw at it. Degelman High Performance Equipment.
There are a lot of steps to having a perfect season. Don't let your fertilizer plan be the step that trips you up. No matter when you apply fertilizer, no matter how, AgroLiquid has the experts and the products that'll help you move closer to your target and hit the bullseye. AgroLiquid moves you closer to your target.
In 1949, Morton Buildings constructed our first machine storage building to establish our bond with the farming community. Since then, our relationship has grown, and so have our product offerings. From the smallest specialized operation to the largest agricultural enterprise, we understand the needs of your business and continue to evolve to meet industry demands. Plus, when you build a Morton building, you're backed by the strongest warranty in the business. To learn more about the Morton Advantage, visit mortonbuildings.com.
Avoid dry run failures with the new Hi-Pro Force Field pump. Providing the ultimate protection, this wet seal pump will save you on costly in-season downtime to keep your sprayer running. Now all you have to worry about is the weather. Hi-Pro, helping you spray better.
Back quite a few years ago when Brian and I were kids and we were out pulling weeds by hand in soybean fields, one of our favorite products that our dad ever used was Metrabutan because it meant we were going to have less weeds we were going to have to pull in the field. Now the big thing for our dad was he wanted to use as much Metrabutan as he could safely use out in the field because we really needed help with weed control. We just didn't have many options other than Brian and me pulling the weeds. So we're going to talk today about how do you figure out what that right rate of Metrabutan is for your farm.
The challenge here is you have varying soil across your field. So you might have areas where you can use a tremendously high rate of Metrabutan and other areas in the same field where you can't. What we're talking about here more than anything is soil type and soil pH. So with soil type, if you have a sandy soil, then you're going to have more activity out of that Metrabutan. You can also leach the Metrabutan out so it's not going to last as long if you have a lot of rainfall. The other factor is soil pH. The higher the soil pH, the more active Metrabutan is. Now it's the same thing with atrazine, for example, that's in the same chemical family as Metrabutan. The higher the pH, the more active it is and the more persistent it is in soil. So our cutoff is usually about 7.4 pH. We're pretty comfortable with normal rates of Metrabutan until you get above 7.4. Now the good news is if you do have some high soil pH, you can actually cut the rate back and get the same effectiveness as I might have to in my lower pH soil at a higher rate. So I guess I'm just trying to say there are advantages and disadvantages to having that high soil pH.
Now with the sandy soil type, here's something where you're going to have to watch things. Let's just say your CEC is 2. If you've got a CEC of 2 or really less than 5, I'd say you probably don't want to use the Metrabutan out there. I'd be really cautious. If you're going to try some, I'd use a really low rate, like maybe 1/12 of a pound. Start there. If you see that it's safe to the crop, then you can increase your rate a little bit accordingly. Now one thing that you'll see with Metrabutan, it has soil uptake. It also has burn down activity, but that's kind of a different thing. But in terms of the soil uptake in soybean plants, what happens if you have too much Metrabutan is it will drop the cotyledons off, and it may even drop the unifoliates off. And if you start seeing plants that are dropping off cotyledons, dropping off unifoliates early season in your soybean fields, you know you got too much Metrabutan.
What he's trying to say here is it works its way up the plant. So atrazine and metribuzin, these products go in the xylem of the plant that only flows upward, and you're going to see the bottom leaves of the plant dropping off. So if that happens, yes, you know you pushed it too far in rate. Speaking of rate, the full rate in soybeans is really 2/3 of a pound. That's what we used to use years ago on our farm. Well, today we kind of talk about 1/3 of a pound being the standard rate, just to be extra safe, extra cautious, because we know there are a lot of high pH spots around the country. But like I was saying earlier, if you get above 7.4, right away I'm going to slash that rate in half. I'm probably going to 1/6 of a pound, maybe even 1/8 of a pound. So you got to be a little bit careful on what you're doing, and it can vary from field to field.
One other thing, Brian, we get the question a lot. All right, I'm using your 3-pre strategy. I'm using a PPO, I'm using one of the yellows. Do I still need to run a strong rate of metribuzin? And if I'm putting metribuzin in, do I still need to run a strong rate of the yellow or the PPO?
Well, it all depends on your situation and how much weed control you want to get. But yes, I'm still going to use, if I've got pH below 7.4 and I'm not in sand, I'm still going to use 1/3 of a pound of metribuzin either way, whether I was using it with those other products or not. In terms of, do I want a full rate of a yellow? Here again, if you want better weed control, yeah, I'm probably going to use a full rate of a yellow. That's really up to you, and you can just play around with those rates a little bit on your farm and see what works best in your situation.
Metribuzin is an excellent herbicide. We really like having it in our 3-pre strategy for soybeans, and you should consider it on your farm. Well, one weed that you may be targeting with your weed control program is our Weed of the Week. Can you identify this week's weed?
At Estes Performance Concaves, we know how valuable your time is at harvest. That's why we designed the new XPR concave system. The XPR system is the #1 performance concave system on the market, surpassing the rest in both speed and efficiency, ensuring every last grain from your field gets into your tank. Plus, XPR concaves work for all row crops. No more changing concaves, meaning you have less downtime. Take back your bushels this harvest. Get Estes Performance Concaves in your combine today.
Why do I farm? It's just something I've always wanted to do. Something I've known since I was my daughter's age. I think about what kind of farm I'm going to hand over to her, about how I can make it more successful, more sustainable. I talk to other farmers, with agronomists and advisors to help me make better decisions, to figure out what's working for them and how to make it work even better for my farm. Because when you farm, you have a responsibility to keep it growing, to look at a freshly planted field, a newborn calf, even your bottom line. Then ask yourself, how do I help this grow? How can I make it even more productive? I ask myself these questions every day, because no matter what I'm doing, I'm still a farmer.
There are a lot of steps to having a perfect season. Don't let your fertilizer plan be the step that trips you up. No matter when you apply fertilizer, no matter how, AgroLiquid has the experts and the products that'll help you move closer to your target and hit the bullseye. AgroLiquid moves you closer to your target.
Your planter is the single most important piece of equipment on your farm, because without a uniform stand, you can't reach maximum yield. That's why Harvest International set out to design a planter that takes advantage of the newest innovations in planter technology. Built tough for high speed and integrated with the latest precision enhancements, Harvest International planters ensure every seed you plant today puts more in your bin at harvest. Harvest International, planting the future.
Today we're going to talk about some of the pre-emerge herbicide programs that are effectively controlling weeds in a number of different crops. We're going to start today by talking about canola.
Unfortunately, in canola, we don't have a whole lot of options. Pre-emerge, we're typically talking to people about trifluralin. Now the thing with trifluralin, this is a really old product. Fortunately, it's still quite effective on most grasses and even some small-seeded broadleaves. I think a lot of people sell this product short when it comes to small-seeded broadleaf control. And when you've got a crop like canola, where you don't have a whole lot of post-emerge options for good broadleaf control, making sure that you're using the right rate of trifluralin. You want to have that rate up as high as you can safely. Typically, we're talking 1.5 pints of trifluralin, and you will get some control out of the small-seeded broadleaves, weeds like lamb's quarters and any of the pigweed species.
One of the things with trifluralin, of course, you're going to have to incorporate it. And I would say this too, if you instantly incorporate it, it works better. So even at 1.5 pints, it's going to be really effective weed control for you. What many farmers that have used it for years have done is put spray nozzles right on the front of their tillage tool. So with one implement driving across the field, they're spraying it and it's being instantly incorporated.
The next crop we'll focus on is dry beans. We talk often in soybeans about using the 3-Pre program. Well, you can't use metribuzin in dry beans, but you certainly can use one of the yellows, Sonalan, Prowl, or trifluralin. Make sure you're checking the rates because that may vary a little bit. With Prowl, we usually don't like to go full rate in dry beans. And then we're not talking Authority in dry beans, we're talking Spartan. Same thing, same product, just a different name. So I'd take a look at those products, Spartan and the yellows. The other option you've got is a product called Spartan Elite, which is going to give you Spartan, the PPO, and a Group 15, that same mode of action you'll find in Dual. That's going to be fine. I just prefer the yellow instead of the Group 15. I love Group 15s, but they're just not as good, not as effective on weeds as the yellows.
One of the things I'd say, Brand, is we don't have many post-emerge options, so we've got to get great weed control pre. So oftentimes when I'm talking to a farmer and he says, man, I got a problem out of my dry beans, what can I do better to get weeds under control? And most of the time they're looking for post-emerge options and just thinking maybe there's a new thing that I haven't heard of yet or something people are doing in another part of the country. And I say, no, it comes back to that pre program. And oftentimes, well, I used a pre. I used Spartan Charge. Well, is that it? You didn't use 2 pre's. You need to be using at least a couple of different pre's here. And like Brad said, you can't use metribuzin, but make sure you're using 2 because it's going to be way cheaper than either losing yield post-emerge or some of the post-emerge products you're going to do to try to clean things up.
Okay, but it's confusing because when you say Spartan Charge, that sounds like I got 2 different things. I got Spartan, I got AIM. But AIM has no residual. AIM is the same chemical family as what Spartan is, so you're not gaining anything other than some burn down. What we're talking about is having 2 residual herbicides. That's what you need. So use a yellow plus Spartan. Now you're in good shape in your dry beans.
Let's turn to field peas now, and the good thing here is you do have 3 pre's that you can use. The one little change from our normal 3-Pre soybean program is you've got to use Spartan rather than Authority, but still to have 3 different modes of action that are effective on so many small-seeded broadleaf weeds is a really good tool in front of field peas.
Yeah, and keep in mind, Spartan is the same thing as Authority, same active ingredient, so really no big change. Okay, now we finally get to lentils. Here again, we're going to use the 3-Pre program, but we've got another little twist to this. Yes, we can use a little bit of metribuzin. We can use some yellow there. That's no problem. But unfortunately, Valor, Authority, Spartan, they are not going to be labeled in lentils, at least as far as we know in any area of the country. But what is labeled is Sharpen. So just check the label to make sure that's still labeled for lentils in your particular state. But you're going to have to use a real low rate of Sharpen. You're not going to get much residual out of this, unfortunately, but you'll get just a little bit, and we do want that because here again, we don't have a lot of real great post-emerge options for weed control. So again, that's a yellow, metribuzin, and a very low rate of Sharpen.
Well, we talked about a number of different crops here, canola, dry beans, field peas, and lentils. Just know this, there are some really good options for pre-emerge weed control, but they do vary depending on which crop you're doing. So if you're raising a number of different crops on your farm, make sure you're checking the labels that these herbicides are labeled in your area.
Will these herbicides control our weed of the week? Well, we'll tell you what will coming up next.
The Weed of the Week is brought to you by Corteva Agriscience, Agriculture Division of Dow DuPont. Finish the fight against tough weeds with the Enlist Weed Control System.
Weeds are tough, but we're tougher. With unrivaled weed control, reduced drift, and near zero volatility. So, who's tough now?
Our weed of the week is Pennsylvania Smartweed.
Let's be honest, Brent, this is a weed that got us in a lot of trouble when we were kids. When we were out pulling weeds in soybean fields, no big deal. We didn't have any problem. But as soon as we were able to start using Roundup, our dad got a bean rider, which basically was a bar that went out in front of the tractor, and there were 4 seats on it. So whoever was driving the tractor would have a spray gun, and then each of the people on the 4 seats would have a spray gun. So we thought, this is pretty cool. We get to just spray weeds with Roundup. Well, what we didn't realize is our soybeans were completely not Roundup resistant, and any splatter,
we realized that.
Any splatter, just a tiny little bit of splatter would be enough to kill beans.
With the weed whoa, you can't say that it killed the beans, Darren. All we did is ding the beans up a little bit.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
If we really overdid it, we killed them.
Okay, now here's the thing with Smartweed is we've got waxy leaves, and when we're spraying, we just couldn't get the stuff to stick on the leaves. So we would spray a little more, thinking, well, maybe we just got to put a little more on there and we'll get some to stick.
Well, wait though, you can't really say that's why we sprayed more. We sprayed more because we would go along 2 and 3 times riding the beans, and we would see, hey, we didn't kill that weed the first time, we better really put a dose on. Here's the whole problem. When you've got a waxy leafed plant, you have to cut the rate of water. We want more concentration. We want a higher concentrated droplet, and we will get absolutely better control.
All right, so here we go. So Brian's going to blame Dad right now that he was too chintzy and he wouldn't let us use enough.
Well, yeah, because he would tell us, mix it up 40-to-1, boys. 40 parts water to 1 part Roundup. Well, that was fine for some weeds, but that wasn't good enough for milkweed. It wasn't good enough for Pennsylvania Smartweed. So this is just an annual weed. It shouldn't be that difficult to control. You just want to keep your water volume down and raise the rate of whatever herbicide you're using just to make sure you get enough into the plant.
Now, one other thing too that we learned, and this is back a few years, we had some areas of our farm that needed drainage improvements. We had some poorly drained spots, and that's where we would normally see smartweed. We used to call it waterweed.
Well, yeah, but
there's grow kind of in those low spots.
Yeah, but there's also swamp smartweed that we saw there, but we would find Pennsylvania smartweed there too. This weed doesn't get real big, so think about it. If you have a small weed, it's not going to compete well with corn or even a big soybean or wheat crop. So if we can have a great crop there, if we have good drainage, we have good fertility, a lot of times we can choke this weed out.
All right, one other place that we would see Pennsylvania smartweed would be creeping out into pastures, ditches, those kinds of things. Again, if it had a spot where it could compete a little more easily.
Yeah, we mowed down the grass too much or overgrazed the grass. Yes, absolutely. But this isn't that difficult a weed to control. Personally, in pastures and some of these non-crop areas, I prefer Distinct. I think that's going to give you the best control, but you could use dicamba or 2,4-D.
Yeah, I like Freelex. That would be another one to use too.
Well, that'd be the 2,4-D.
When we get into soybeans, here's where we had a little bit of trouble. Like we mentioned before, and we were out trying to spray for Pennsylvania smartweed. What I would do though is start with the 3-pre strategy, and that's something that we didn't have back in those days. We didn't have those PPOs. They really do add some punch. Now, it's not going to completely wipe out Pennsylvania smartweed, but it is certainly going to reduce the population.
If I was in conventional beans today, I'd probably want to have a little bit of Pursuit out there, maybe some Flex Star, something like that. All you're going to do is burn that weed down. You got to start with a good pre-program.
In corn, I like the programs that have a little more of a broadleaf component pre, but if you're in conventional corn, I just use a strong rate of a group 15. I'd use a full labeled rate. My preference though, if you're in corn where you can spray Roundup post-emerge, is I'd just start off with something like Verdict. That's going to do a nice job burning down any smartweed that may be up, but it's going to give you some residual control on them too.
All right, turning to wheat, I'd probably start with Sharpen and follow up post-emerge with Husky.
That's all the time we have for our Weed of the Week, Pennsylvania Smartweed, but Iron Talk is coming up next.
Tough, precise, efficient. Strip tillage with the Soil Warrior brings the future to your farm. Learn more at soilwarrior.com/agphd.
Invisible, invasive, underestimated. Nematodes are stealing over 10% of yields, and current protection methods aren't enough. But a breakthrough seed treatment technology controls nematodes when they attack. Now offering NEMA Strike technology. It provides broad spectrum control from the start and stays in the root zone as plants grow. Take back your bushels with NEMA Strike technology. Strike where nematodes attack.
If you're looking to expand your farm's grain handling, you want everything to be fast and efficient. The Quick Belt from Norwood Sales is your all-around grain handling solution. Our conveyor-based system uses an 18-inch belt and a 10-inch tube, which minimizes seed damage while moving more than 10,000 bushels an hour. That's fast enough to fill a semi in 6 minutes. Plus, our hood is designed to gently direct the flow of grain straight down, keeping your crop in condition. Keep your grain and your farm moving with the Quick Belt from Norwood Sales.
In 1949, Morton Buildings constructed our first machine storage building to establish our bond with the farming community. Since then, our relationship has grown, and so have our product offerings. From the smallest specialized operation to the largest agricultural enterprise, we understand the needs of your business and continue to evolve to meet industry demands. Plus, when you build a Morton building, you're backed by the strongest warranty in the business. To learn more about the Morton Advantage, visit mortonbuildings.com.
At Estes Performance Concaves, we know how valuable your time is at harvest. That's why we designed the new XPR concave system. The XPR system is the #1 performance concave system on the market, surpassing the rest in both speed and efficiency, ensuring every last grain from your field gets into your tank. Plus, XPR concaves work for all row crops. No more changing concaves, meaning you have less downtime. Take back your bushels this harvest. Get Estes Performance Concaves in your combine today.
Iron Talk is brought to you by Case IH.
There are 6,272,640 square inches in an acre. We counted. Why? Because we designed the TigerMate 255 field cultivator and 2000 series early riser planter to maximize every single one. So when you create the most level seed bed in the industry and target a nickel-size area to plant a seed and never miss, you'll know in high-efficiency farming, there's one name to count on. Case IH. Rethink productivity. Learn more at caseih.com/everyinch.
Get out of the tractor. Planting season is always a rush, especially this year with all the fall work that didn't get done. Unless you have someone else walking around in your fields and doing a lot of digging, it's your job to get out of the tractor cab fairly often to make sure you're getting your job done right. Here are 3 things to check this spring. If you do tillage, check the tillage floor. Sweep away the top few inches that you just tilled up and make sure there's an even floor under the tillage. If not, make adjustments now to your tillage tool so you create an equal environment for every seed. It may only take 15 or 30 minutes to get everything set just right, but if it saves you from something that costs even 1 bushel on 1,000 acres, at $3.50 corn, that's a job that pays you at least $7,000 an hour. Here's another thing that may be even more important that you should be checking too. Seedbed conditions. Your seedbed should be crumbly and not too fluffy or too sticky. Seed-to-soil contact will be critical for top yields and a great start. If you didn't get your seedbed prepped last fall, this could be a real challenge and may delay you a couple of days. Finally, there's seed depth. If your seed depth isn't the same for every seed in the field when you're planting corn or other crops, you won't maximize yield. In fact, you'll lose a lot of yield. Plants that emerge several days later produce much smaller ears and many less pods than the plants that emerge together on the first day. This isn't a 1 bushel per acre kind of payback. It may well be a 20 bushel or more difference if your depth is highly variable. So get out and check this often. I know you're hustling, even more than normal, to get everything done timely this year, but I encourage you, get out of the tractor more often and check things to save yourself the trouble of fixing them later and to give your fields the best chance at making a profit this year. That's all for today's Iron Talk, and now back to the show.
That's all the time we've got for today's show, but before we go, we want to encourage you to tune into the Ag PhD radio show. You'll find us on Sirius XM channel 147 at 2 p.m. Central each weekday.
And don't miss the next Ag PhD TV show. We'll have another Weed of the Week, Farm Basics, Iron Talk, and a whole lot more. I'm Darren Hefty.
And I'm Brian Hefty. Thanks for watching Ag PhD.